Hello, my name is Diane, and today I want to talk about all the book series that I finished reading this year. Fantasy books tend to come in series, and a lot of the times those series can be pretty long, not just as a series, but each individual book is usually pretty long too. So I think it's a lot easier to start a series than it is to not only keep up with an ongoing series, but to finish a completed one. I tried to make it a priority this year to finish the series I was starting or currently reading, rather than just adding to my very long list of in-progress series. And while I'm still reading a lot of series, I think it did a pretty good job at finishing a lot of series as well. The first series I finished this year is The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. I read the entire series in the first 6 months of the year. My plan was to read one book every month, and that just felt like it was taking too long, and I ended up plowing through most of the series, reading essentially a book a week. This is a 14-book series, and I also read the prequel story afterwards, so in total I read 15 books from this series, which is a lot. I really don't recommend doing that with this series. It's just big and dense. Some of the books are very long and drawn out, and for me, since I read them all back to back, a lot of the books kind of blend together, and I just know chunks of the story rather than here's what happened in this book, here's what happened in this book. This definitely isn't a perfect series, but I can see why it's had such lasting power in the fantasy world. It was a very good story overall. Some books were definitely better than others, but it's such a rich world with a large cast of characters, and it's really crazy to think that Robert Jordan kept them all straight somehow and created this place with all of these different cultures and people in it. I had a lot of fun with the series, obviously, or I don't think I would have been able to get such an enormous series in such a relatively short amount of time. The next series I finished is the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. The third book of this is definitely the slowest moving, and that's the one I read this year. But I just really like Robin Hobb's writing. I don't really mind as much the slower, more day in the life feeling of the last book. While a lot of the things that happen don't necessarily feel significant, they feel very intentional, and I really like that kind of writing where not everything has to be a big, obvious plot point, but it all has a specific purpose, and that's what I think Robin Hobb does really well, and why I don't really mind just kind of hanging out with her characters. It does get a little bit draggy in the last book, and then the ending is just where everything happens. It's kind of a wild ending to such a slow-paced series. But I had a lot of fun with the series. I'm looking forward to continuing on with The Realm of the Elderling overall, but I am glad that I've got the first series under my belt. The next series I finished is The Memoirs of Lady Trent by Marie Brennan. I had read the first book a few years ago, and then I reread it at the beginning of this year and finished the rest of the series. This follows Isabella. She studies dragons and becomes obsessed with them from a very young age, but as a woman, she's not really supposed to be a naturalist going on adventures to study dragons out in the wild, but she manages to find ways around that and ends up becoming a notable figure in her field. Some of these books were definitely better than others. I had some problems with the world building or lack thereof. It's definitely very closely based off of a lot of places and cultures in our real world, thinly veiled as fantasy. But I do really like the way that dragons are approached in this series, where they're really just wild animals and not enormous mythical beings, which is an interesting take on dragons. So I did read this entire series, and Also, the companion novel, Turning Darkness into Light, which follows Isabella's granddaughter. While that one isn't really a continuation of this series, I also don't know how well it would stand on its own if you don't have the background of this series before going into it. But overall, I liked this series. The next series I finished is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. I've seen Howl's Moving Castle, the movie, years ago and only vaguely remember it. So it was really fun to read the book and see what things I remember and what things are different, because they did make a fair amount of changes when adapting this book into a movie. But it's just so chaotically magical in a way that everything starts out a little magical and then things just build and build and build and it gets a little crazy and then everything comes together. And I just think it's a lot of fun. The characters are a lot of fun. The world is very whimsical. The next series I finished is Edinburgh Nights by T.L. Huchu, and this is I guess, futuristic Edinburgh, where there's been some big collapse, and we follow a teenage main character who works delivering messages from the dead to the living. And she uncovers something terrible that's going on to children in the city and ends up involving herself in trying to figure it out and stop it. I think this series is a lot of fun. I don't think it's going to be for everyone, but I really liked the main character. I liked her voice as the narrator. She's got a lot of personality, a lot of snark and responsibility for someone so young. And I just think it was a lot of fun to read this series. The next series, which isn't really much of an accomplishment because there's only one book out, but that is Black Tongue by Christopher Buehlman. From what I've seen from the publisher, the second book's not scheduled to come out until 2024, so there is quite a wait on the sequel to this one, but I believe there's supposed to be a prequel come out before then. So I'll be keeping an eye out for both of those, but I think this story is a lot of fun. It's kind of a bit of a goofier, lighthearted tone to the book, while the story itself isn't exactly lighthearted. I think this was a fun fantasy adventure, and I had a good time reading it. The next series is Fractured Fables by Alex E. Harrow. There are 2 books out in this. I'm not sure if any more are going to be coming out. It doesn't sound like it from what I've heard, but you never know. And this is a sort of a modern twist on Sleeping Beauty, where the main character is basically a spin-off of Sleeping Beauty, and she, very Alice Through the Looking Glass style, gets thrown into another actual Sleeping Beauty story, and there's all these basically other dimensions with fairy tale characters, and she winds up getting thrown into them. It's a pretty quick, interesting take on the fairy tale trope, kind of self-aware look at Sleeping Beauty and princesses, and they're kind of resigned to just being the princess of the story and not necessarily the hero or the one calling the shots. The next series I finished is the Shattered Sea trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. I thought this was a lot of fun to read. I really liked that each book in the trilogy follows different main characters, but they all continue the same plot. They all have something tying them together until the final book, where you have a lot of familiar faces who are all continuing the story together. So the main characters you follow in the first story are different from the main characters you follow in the second story, but you're following the same overarching plot, even though each book is fairly self-contained, except maybe the last one. But I really like this. This was my first introduction to Joe Abercrombie, and I'm reading one of his other series now. The next series is Castback by Edgar Rice Burroughs. I don't know what it is about this trope of finding like a lost world where there's still like dinosaurs and these sort of prehistoric type of tribal people. I think it's just the time period where all of these stories were written. There's just something so nostalgic and charming about it to me. I just remember watching films based on these types of stories when I was younger and they were on TV. And these are definitely written way before my time, but I just really enjoyed watching them. I just think they're kind of goofy. The men are very macho. There's always some very attractive love interest. It's just so dated, but I still love these types of stories, so this was a lot of fun for me to read. The next series I finished is Clock Tower War by T. Kingfisher. This is a duology that follows a group of adventurers who, most of them don't exactly like each other. Two of them are criminals. One of them is a paladin who's going through it. And they are sent on a suicide mission to travel to another city and stop these maybe mechanical, no one's really sure what they are, creatures that are coming to destroy everything. This is a lot of fun. T. Kingfisher seems to have a lot of lighthearted, humorous things injected into the darker, more dangerous things that are going on in her stories. So there's a nice balance. And I had a lot of fun reading both of these books. The next series I'm caught up on is Finley Donovan by El Cosimano. And there are 2 books in this out already, and the 3rd one comes out next month, and I'm very excited about it. This is a story about a woman who is a suspense writer, and she is mistaken as a contract killer and offered a lot of money to take care of someone. And as a single mother with some money problems, she finds it very tempting and considers turning to crime to make some of her other problems go away. And it's very funny, very messy, but in an entertaining way. Finley gets in a bit of a pickle, deciding if she should come clean to the person who wants to hire her and tell them that she's really not an assassin, she's just an author, or if she should maybe take the job so she can pay her bills and get her life back on track, at least financially. The next series I got caught up on is Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. It's been all the buzz. It's really not something I would normally read, but it is a cute story. It does really capture the early stages of a relationship and falling for someone and exploring feelings of not really knowing who you are or who you think you're supposed to be, and when those 2 things are at odds. There are 4 volumes of that out, and the 5th one is supposed to come out next year. I've been reading it online though, so I'm a little ahead of what's already been released in book form. So I'm looking forward to reading the ending of that. The next series I finished is Nevermore by Jessica Townsend. This series is a middle grade fantasy that I have been recommended by a few people, and where I've never really read middle grade, even when I was in that age group. I never really paid much mind to those recommendations, and then after reading Howl's Moving Castle, which is in that category, I thought maybe middle grade's just where it's at. They're very whimsical, magical stories. There's always something interesting going on, and a lot of the relationships are based on friendships rather than romantic relationships, which I definitely prefer reading friend dynamics over romance. Nevermore has a lot of fun, magical things going on. There are a lot of wonderful friendships happening, and I'm really glad this was put on my radar by a couple of people in my life. And I'm looking forward to the 4th installment coming out. And the final series that I read this year is Monk and Robot by Becky Chambers. Well, I didn't really fall for this series as hard as a lot of people did. I did have a lot of fun with this. I really loved the character of Moscap, the robot. I just think this was an interesting world, a very cozy read, just a way to think about what people need and how to take care of each other and ourselves. but without anything too big or sweeping of a plot going on. I am interested in reading more of Becky Chambers after reading this. So those are all the series I finished or got caught up on this year. I'm still definitely in the middle of a lot of other series and will continue to start series that hopefully I'll finish, but maybe not. Let me know if there's any great series that you finished this year. That's all for me today. I'll see you next time. Bye.